Professor Erik, we welcome you here in Hamad bin Khalifa University, College of Islamic Studies at the Program of Islam and Global Affairs. Professor Erik, of course, you are a very well-known, respected professor in the field of international relations and world history with your PhD from Yale University, I believe in the 1980s probably?
1990s.
1990s, as well as your 50-plus peer-reviewed articles and your 5 books. And you have been contributing to the advancement of international relations. We are pleased to have you here with us in Doha, in Qatar. And I have basically few questions for this interview. Professor Erik, you have been talking and lecturing about alternatives to international relations, this current field of international relations. My question to you is, how do you define a non-Western international relations field of study?
Well, I mean, there are different answers to that question. And you can imagine that you take the current world system for granted and you devise a non-Western theory of that system. So that's certainly possible. But what I've started thinking about is whether it would be possible to question the basic units, the basic building blocks of the existing Western system. And if you do that, you will immediately start talking about the nation state. So the nation state is a very European institution. It originated in Europe and has a European history. So, and this is not true elsewhere in the world. So my idea is that a non-Western international relations theory would really benefit from alternatives. And there are plenty of alternatives.
Yes.
There are indigenous traditions, there are not European. So the short answer is to say that non-Western IR theory is an IR theory that's not based on the nation state.
Okay, that's great. I mean, then if I would ask you for, say, some kind of models or examples that can be representing this non-Western international relations kind of theory, what could be that?
Yeah, I mean, world history is long, very long, and there's so many different examples.
Yeah.
But something that strikes me is that the European international system is based on sovereign units, sovereign nation states. They are competing with each other in a system which is exceptionally violent. And so many people have died in Europe, in the European world, since the last 500 years or so. And if you look elsewhere, what you find is that you don't really have similar systems made up of sovereign units. They exist in some places, like in ancient China, where there was a warring state period, and there are other cases, India, for example, with states that fight each other in a kind of European way. But in all these other places, in the end, an empire emerges. Empire or caliphate, or they're different names. But they're big entities. And this happened in Europe too, but it's a long time ago. That's the Roman Empire, right? That's 2,000 years ago. And since then, we don't have that experience in Europe. So if you base an IR theory on European experiences, you're basing it on experiences that are quite exceptional in a way. The main experience for the rest of the world is the experience of empires. And empires function very differently. I mean, for one thing, there are not that cutthroat dog-eat-dog competition, right, between the units. So it becomes immediately different kind of international relations.
So you think in your basically development of this kind of non-Western international relations that there are 2 issues here to tackle basically. One is the nation state as the cornerstone for the current body of knowledge in international relations, and to tackle that basically, to look into the second, which is the previous experiences, historical experiences of how international relations field were made up basically according to empires or caliphate or something basically. But now the question is, there were other kind of modalities. I mean, nomads maybe been representing their own kind of approach, which is different than the nation state. But it seems to me that probably nation states are not quite friendly with this kind of flexible movements and so on.
For sure.
Yeah. Then how would you see this to be resolved basically between those who have power and leading the world basically? How can you see where is the, I mean, we know the departure points now in terms of theorization, but in terms of actioning this or planning for this or the foresight or future of this.
But I think the study of non-Western international relations will have to be a historical discipline, because we're now living in a Western world. I mean, every country is trying to become a Western type of state with its own nation. So if we want to understand alternatives, we have to go back into history. The interesting thing is, of course, what happens in the future. And it seems to me that it's common knowledge, but not often enough acknowledged, that the nation states in much of the world fail. They are not viable, and they lead to endless trouble. And the Western response is always, well, you have to try harder, you have to build better, right? And this is what I'm questioning. And I'm saying that maybe we can try something else. Now, if you're talking about how to action this, how to bring about this change, that's clearly very difficult, because it's a question of who has the weapons, right, and who is in charge. And the leaders of states are not willingly going to give up their power. But at the same time, there are transformations in the world economy and technology, or issues like mobility because of wars and refugees and climate change. And these forces are in a way more powerful than the individual rulers, right? Even if they have weapons. I mean, climate change is much bigger force. So possibly these bigger forces will force a change. Change will become imperative. There's no alternative. I mean, if we can't live here, we have to go somewhere. And then the nation state will look suddenly very obsolete.
But I mean, right now we have, of course, in the global system, we have regional organizations. Of course, we have the United Nations, and we have the regional organizations, multilateral organizations, you can say. For example, the European Union. In a way, the European Union, though this idea of Eurocentric international relations came up, but the European Union, basically, and the European market and so on, is giving an idea about Europe as one block, basically. And they have, like, you know, the highest level of who represent the foreign affairs of basically international relations of Europe. How do you comment on that, basically? Because that is considered to be away from, you know, basically giving up some of the national sovereignty for a collective.
No, it's very ironic, isn't it, that this is what happened, because the nation states were European inventions, and they exported or forced it on the rest of the world. And since, what is it now, 75 years, Europe has changed, itself has changed a lot, and transformed itself away from the nation state model with more pooled sovereignty. And of course, this is a complicated process with a lot of struggles and conflicts and Brexit, right? Some leave, etc. So it's not a smooth path. And God knows what's going to happen in the future. I mean, no one knows, but it's certainly been a move away from the traditional model of national sovereignty. There's no question about that.
The other thing is that for those who probably advocate or pro a non-Western approach, there is another force which is nationalism and populism, basically, which is becoming really quite rising, you can say, in many parts in Europe. I mean, and that would give the opposite idea for moving from the pooled kind of governance structure into something else. How do you see that?
I like to think about this question as a question of walls and bridges. So we want to build bridges because we want to connect. And this is how we become prosperous, and this is how we trade. And we have influences from abroad, and this widens our horizons. And so all these great things come, right, from the bridges. But at the same time, I mean, we want to protect our homes. So we want to build walls. Yeah. And we want to be secure, and we want to be able to close the door and be at home. And I think those two tendencies are probably human. I mean, basic part of human nature, human society. And the question will always be how to balance it, right? So I think for people, it's difficult to always move. But it's also very difficult to always close your door, right? So, and the question is whether you can live in an open world which still gives guarantees about security and prosperity, and so it's not threatening to you.
I mean, the issue as well, if we move a little bit from Europe to, say, other continents, like, for example, Asia and Africa, and these are, continents with civilizations of non-Western experiences, except probably the colonization time. Are there basically scholars who are calling for, to somehow for non-Western approaches when it comes to, for example, in Africa, especially Africa, facing many challenges from past colonization and probably forces of change that is taking place?
Well, the first generation of independence leaders wanted independence for their respective countries, but they also wanted something more. They wanted regional federations, or maybe united Africa. And the same thing in the Middle East and the Arab world. That alone we are weak, and Europeans can dominate us very easily. But if we can unite together, then we have much more power and much more influence. So these ideas were strong in the 1950s and 60s, but then they disappeared more or less. So, I mean, the idea of pan-Arabism didn't really survive the 1973 war, for example, with Israel. After that, it sort of fell apart. But history is not over, right? Things can change again. And things, because also in the Arab world, there's a lot of obvious discontent with the local rulers in one country after the other, right? There's a lot of disaffection, obviously. So the sort of, how to say, Pan-Arabism 2.0 or something like that. I don't know, 3.0, I don't know what number, but you can imagine a revival.
Yes. Yeah, maybe some were quite optimistic with the Arab Spring, that it will lead probably a major change in the region, but unfortunately, of course, there were what you call the post-Arab Spring kind of, civil wars and crisis and so on, which created
American influence, American pressure.
Yes, and created failed states to some extent. I mean,
no, but on the other hand, I mean, two things. You see Morocco playing in the World Cup, and suddenly, the Arab world is united, right?
Yes.
And now we have the situation in Palestine, and again, the Arab Muslim world is united. So there's a lot of fellow feeling or feeling of commonality. Right?
Taking into account the crisis in Gaza and the phenomena of failed states, do you think that a non-Western international relations could better address this kind of crisis, the Gaza crisis and the failed state crisis in general?
I'm very impressed with the ancient empires of Asia, like the Ottoman Empire, the Persian empires, Indian empires, Chinese empires, so on, because they were very good at dealing with diversity. And this is what nation states can't do. They cannot deal with diversity. You have to be a person of a certain kind. So it always seemed to me that you could imagine a new caliphate in the Middle East that had its principles of peaceful coexistence of different communities, like the dhimmi system, where different communities can live in their own fashion, under the auspices of a sort of imperial, caliphal framework.
Yes.
And if that happened in the case of Palestine, you can imagine Palestinians living in Palestine and Israelis living in Israel, Jews living in Israel. Although they're neighbors, you can live in a sense in your own community.
Okay, I mean, let me probably finally raise the issue of the future of the international relations field from your experiences and your opinion, Professor Erik.
I mean, I know that everything that has started will one day end. This is life. And if we say that the state was born maybe 500 years ago, and that the nation was born sometime in the 19th century, and that these two came together as nation states, then we also know that the day will come when something else needs to replace them. And we see these forces already now. And it's very exciting to study this field for that reason. Things are happening. And my humble idea is that knowledge of history can help us understand the future.
Professor Erik, thank you very much.
Thank you.
For your time and really for these insights and these kind of profound ideas. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.